So you did it. You went through all the years of studying, you crushed the exams, and you finally earned those three powerful letters after your name, CPA. But what if I told you that a tiny little oversight, just a simple mistake, could put that entire career in jeopardy? Well, today we're digging into the one thing that can make or break your professional life: compliance. We're going to look at the rules you have to follow and exactly what happens when you don't.
All right, here's our game plan. First, we'll cover the absolute must-knows, the compliance mandate for every CPA. Then, we're going to jump into a real-world case study to see what happens when the rules get broken. We'll follow the story from the moment the citation is issued, walk through the entire appeals process, and land on the final verdict. I promise, by the end of this, you'll know exactly what you need to do to protect that hard-earned license.
Okay, let's get right into it. And just to be clear, these aren't friendly suggestions from the California Board of Accountancy. Nope. These are the fundamental rules of the road that every single CPA has to live by.
At the very heart of all this is something called continuing education, or CE. Think of it like this. Would you really want a surgeon using tools and techniques from the 1980s? Of course not. Well, the same thing goes for accounting. CE is how you stay sharp, how you stay on top of your game in a world that's always changing. It's not just a box to check, it's essential. So, what's the magic number? It's 80. Every 2-year license renewal period, you've got to clock in 80 hours of CE. Now, that sounds pretty straightforward, right? But, as we're about to find out, the devil is really, really in the details. Because here's the first big catch. This is where people get tripped up all the time. It's not just about getting 80 hours over 2 years. The rule is super specific. You have to complete a minimum of 20 of those hours in each individual year. So no, you can't just cram 80 hours into the last few months. It doesn't work that way.
And you guessed it, there's one more layer. Of those 20 hours you need each year, at least 12 of them have to be in what are called technical subject areas. So let's just recap the formula really quick. 80 hours total, but at least 20 each year. And of that 20, at least 12 have to be technical. You get that, and you're in the clear. Okay, so we've laid out the rules, but talking about them is one thing. What happens when someone breaks them, even by just a little bit? Let's leave the rulebook behind and look at an actual, real-life case that came before the board. This is where theory gets very, very real. Now, take a look at this. This is the heart of the problem in our case study. It wasn't some massive failure. It was a deficit of just 2.5 technical hours in the first year. You might look at that and think, seriously, that's it? But yeah, that's it. And that tiny gap was enough to cause a huge problem. And listen up, because this is the most critical piece of the whole story. The CPA in this case actually completed more than 80 hours over the 2 years. They did 81 hours in total. But guess what? It didn't matter. Not one bit. That failure to meet the annual minimum, that 2.5-hour shortfall, is what triggered the violation. Those yearly rules are not a suggestion. So the mistake has been made. What happens now? Well, it's not a friendly phone call or a little slap on the wrist. A violation like this starts a formal process, and it all begins with an official notice from the California Board of Accountancy. And let me be clear, we're not talking about a casual email. We're talking about a formal citation, an official document on official letterhead from the state. When something like this shows up in your mail, believe me, your stomach is going to drop. It means things just got serious. This citation lays everything out in no uncertain terms. It tells you exactly what rule you broke. It specifies that 2.5-hour deficit we talked about. It tells you how much you owe for the fine. And very importantly, it tells you how you can appeal the whole thing. In this particular case, the fine was $150. And you're probably thinking, $150, I can live with that. But you're missing the point. The money is nothing. The real cost is the permanent public black mark on your professional record. And that's something you can never erase. But look, getting that citation doesn't have to be the end of the story. You have the right to challenge it, to make your case. And that's exactly what the CPA in our story did. So let's walk through what the appeals process actually looks like. So appealing, this isn't some quick and simple thing. It's a whole formal legal journey. It starts with you filing an official notice. Then you eventually get what's basically your day in court, an administrative hearing. Both sides present their evidence, and then you just have to wait for a judge to make the final call. The stakes are pretty high.
So what was the defense? What did the CPA argue?
Well, they brought up their squeaky clean record over 20 years with no issues. They explained that they had just changed jobs and were waiting on the new company to get the CEs sorted. They argued that they knew they'd hit the 80-hour total eventually. Basically, they called all of this extenuating circumstances. It sounds reasonable, right? But is it a winning legal argument?
So here we are. On one hand, you've got a veteran CPA with what seems like a pretty good excuse. On the other hand, you've got the cold, hard letter of the law. How does a judge weigh those two? Well, this is the moment of truth.
And boom, there it is. This one sentence from the judge's final decision says everything you need to know. Let me say it again. Compliance is mandatory, and it's not subject to your personal convenience or how much it costs. In other words, your problems are your problems. The rules are the rules, period.
Let's just break this down so it's crystal clear. The CPA argued extenuating circumstances like a job change. The board's conclusion? That's just a matter of convenience, not a legal excuse. The CPA said, but I exceeded the 2-year total. The conclusion? The annual minimums are not optional. And what about that long, unblemished career? Well, that was considered when they set the small fine. But it did not and could not excuse the violation itself.
So after all that, the hearing, the arguments, the whole process, what was the outcome? The appeal was denied. The original citation stood, and the $150 fine was upheld. The system worked exactly the way it's supposed to.
Okay, so what does this all mean for you right now? Let's boil it down to the essentials. 1. Those annual minimums, they're just as important as the big 80-hour number. 2. You can't blame your job or your budget. They are not legal excuses. 3. A great track record might help with the penalty, but it will never erase the violation. And number 4, the most important one, at the end of the day, the responsibility is yours and yours alone. And that really brings us to the final question, the one you need to ask yourself right now. Is your license in good standing? Do you know for a fact that your CE credits are on track? Because if there's any doubt in your mind, now is the time to check. As we've clearly seen today, when it comes to compliance, what you don't know can absolutely hurt you.